Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever struggled with injury, illness, disease, or a mental condition and thought, or have been told it's in your genes, or it's in your family, or your mom and dad had it, so will you, and there's nothing you can do about it, then do we have the Do About It show for you. Today we'll be talking with energy psychology expert Dr. Dawson Church, the award-winning best-selling author of The Genie in Your Genes. It's a breakthrough book on the link between emotions and genetics. He also founded the National Institute for Integrative Healthcare to study and implement promising evidence-based psychological and medical techniques. Today we'll talk about what epigenetics is, why it matters, and how we can change the way our genes work or express themselves during our lifetime. We'll look at how our genes are supposed to work, why they're a bit off track today, and what we can do to help our genes work with us rather than against us. That post will look at how to design the brain we want, the medical power of prayer, why there's more than 3 wishes in a genie's lamp, and how to give birth to healthy, happy rats.
And we'll laugh a lot as well.
Absolutely. So welcome to the show, Dawson. I can already tell. Are you ready to shine?
Absolutely, with you and with everyone listening in, Michael. I love being here.
So I love having you here in a mighty woohoo, which is an epigenetic tool we'll get into. but
it works.
Before we dive into the woohoo, how in the world did you get started in epigenetics?
I became fascinated by the link between energy, psychology, and gene expression. And I was going to conferences many years ago. I'd written a book with a dear friend and mentor of mine, Dr. Norm Shealy, who is the founder of the American Holistic Medical Association. And as I worked on that book called Soul Medicine, it's a very powerful book even today. It's like 15 years since we wrote the book together, but the book is still really relevant. And as I looked at energy in medicine, that book is all about how energy has been used for healing since the earliest times, since prehistory. And I began to see these links as how energy, how psychology, how emotions, how spirituality must affect gene expression. And I thought, it was one of those funny things too, that I knew somebody was going to write this book. And I thought, I'm just tracing all these links, connecting all these dots. No one's connected them before. If I didn't write this book, someone's going to write it soon. It may as well be me. So I jumped in there. I did the research. The first edition of the book included about 300 scientific studies, which I summarized. The new edition, the newest edition, includes about 450 scientific studies. And
I've got to say, in the most beautiful way, it completely, I don't want to use the word overwhelms the audience, but as an interviewer, you're going, oh my God, this, oh my God, that. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the other thing. Because it's all great stuff that really empowers us.
It is, and it's a big picture. It is overwhelming to look at the whole thing. So I try and break it down in the book into simple principles, and also tell stories about how it affects people personally, stories of personal healing, and I find analogies to describe this. Just one example, I was looking for a way to illustrate the difference between the electromagnetic signaling in our cells. Our cells signal, we have these huge electromagnetic fields around our bodies. When you go to get an MRI, an MRI machine, they're measuring that. When you get an EEG, it's measuring the fields in your brain. But we also have neurochemical signaling. We have sodium and chloride ions that cross our neural cell walls, and that's one of the signaling systems in our bodies. But I was trying to illustrate the difference between the signaling at the energy level and the signaling at the chemical level of neural transmission. And so I was talking to one of my friends about this at a conference. I was just agonizing, how can I make this really obvious to people? And as we were having this discussion, we walked out of the conference center into the parking lot, and I used the clicker on my key ring.
Yes, you have that graphic in your book.
And I suddenly realized, there's the perfect example of the speed of electromagnetic signaling. I click this little gizmo on my key, and it unlocks my car instantly from a long distance. That's the speed, way quicker than chemical signaling, molecules passing along a chain. So I looked for ways of illustrating these really complicated scientific principles to make them super easy to understand with analogies like that.
So let's go from there into the basics, which is, how are genes affected by our external environment?
Our genes are affected by our external environment in a host of ways. One is the threat response. When you are threatened in some way, when you have to get out of danger, you have what's called the fight or flight response, which powerfully engages your body. Survival is the most important thing any organism has to do. So when you're triggered by anything bad going on, if there's a dog that barks loudly and rushes across the street toward you, you get this feeling of panic in your body. What's happening is that your levels of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline are rising. That's what makes your heart start to pound, you breathe shallowly, your muscles get ready for fight or flight to defend yourself from that dog barking. So that external event of the dog barking is being translated by messenger molecules inside your body into internal molecular signals, which are affecting your heart rate, your respiration, your skin, all kinds of things happening internally as a result of that external signal. In the first edition of my book, The Genie in Your Genes, what I said was that we know that cortisol is rising, we know your adrenaline is rising, but those hormones are coded by genes. So therefore, those genes must be getting turned on. All of those
is that what epigenetics is then? The genes getting expressed or turned on?
Yes, turned on or turned off. That's epigenetics. And so at that time, when I wrote that first edition in 2004, there was no experimental evidence. There's very little evidence of this in terms of scientific studies I could cite. I was just saying, this must be happening. We know, I can cite studies showing that adrenaline and cortisol rise. Yep. That must mean that those genes are being turned on. Now, when I wrote the last edition a couple of years ago, there are dozens of studies demonstrating that. So it shows the link between those external events and internal gene expression.
So you talk about something in the book called a maladaptive response, and it could be the dog barking, or you use an amazing example in the book that all too many people are familiar with, which is downsizing in a company, and whether you survive or not, that your system's on overdrive. What exactly does a maladaptive response mean? Why is that important?
A maladaptive response, in a nutshell, is going into fight or flight when there's no real threat to your survival. Like that, the company, a conflict in your company, a conflict in your marriage, a conflict with your children, with your parents, whatever it is, that's not a real threat to your survival, or even remembering a real threat to your survival. So maybe you have the dog barking and you run away, or the dog runs away, you defend yourself, the incident is over. Remembering the event later on, when you're telling your best friend about that a week later, maybe if you're still highly emotionally triggered, maybe your cortisol is rising and your adrenaline is rising now, and there's no dog there at all. So nothing bad is happening. When you're having that bad interaction at work, there's no threat to your survival, and yet your adrenaline and cortisol are rising. So most of us, Michael, are walking around with dramatically too high levels of these stress hormones, the neurotransmitters of stress, the hormones of stress, and that is depleting our body. High cortisol over time. I have a list in the book. Now, this is The Genie in Your Genes is an inspirational book, but I'll tell you a dirty secret. I said to myself, okay, I'm going to collect all of the studies on the bad effects of cortisol, and I'm going to put them on a page. So there's one page in the book, I forget which page it is now.
The inflammatory page. That page is on fire.
The inflammatory page. I list all the bad stuff that happens from high cortisol, high stress over time. And it includes diabetes, heart disease, hepatitis, cancer, increased risk of risky behavior, all kinds of problems that occur from high cortisol over time. And I said, okay, I'm going to do my best in this book to inspire them. But if I can't inspire them, I'm going to terrify my readers into changing.
No. So let's look at this then. And I'm pulling out my epigenetic fire extinguisher here. and we're told, of course it's fight or flight. It's in our genes.
it is coded in your genes, but the genes are a set of instructions. What you do with them is up to you. That your genes are like the 24,000 instruments in a huge orchestra, but knowing what the instruments are tells you nothing whatsoever about the music you're playing with them. You are the conductor of the orchestra, you write the score, and you determine what kind of music you play with those genes. So epigenetics is not just the dog running out at you, it's also your thinking about the dog later on. It's also the way you mentally process events. It's also the childhood trauma you drag along with you. I talk a lot in the book about the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And that study showed that it was a huge, large-scale study over 10 years, 17,000 people in that study. And it showed that people who have high levels of unprocessed childhood trauma, adverse child experiences, have higher rates of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, suicide attempts, smoking, all kinds of problems later on that are linked to that unprocessed childhood trauma. And the more trauma you have, the higher your risk factors. So it's so important to not be reliving the bad stuff, not be turning over those bad events in your mind over and over again, not be catastrophizing, not be ruminating about those bad things, because they're driving your genes. They're driving your cortisol and adrenaline high. They're turning on all those stress genes in the complete absence of any real threat to your survival.
So if we get that, if we get those, for instance, childhood wounds looked at, taken care of, diffused, whatever we want to call it, and then we're faced with a stressful situation at work, the gene that would flip, that makes it a 10 out of 10, might not flip, meaning it's a more manageable 3 or 4 out of 10 when you're wondering if the boss is coming by about to give you the pink slip.
Right. It might be a 3 or 4 out of 10, or it might still go up to 10 out of 10, but you won't stay there. You'll then do some of the things I recommend in the book. I recommend neurofeedback, biofeedback, EFT tapping, meditation. And what you'll then do is you may hit a 10 out of 10 very quickly, and then you're back to zero in just 10 minutes, half an hour, because you've used one of these tools that research now shows is literally turning genes on and turning genes off. It's turning the anti-stress genes on. It's turning the stress genes off. And gene expression is not like an on-off switch, like a light switch being either on or off. It's like a dimmer switch or rheostat. So we're down-regulating genes or up-regulating genes. It's not just either or. It's more or less gene expression.
We were talking off air before we started about someone I know who has had a test on their breasts for a lump, and then had a genetic test, and based on the genetic test had their breasts removed to be safe. Are you saying that just because you have a gene saying that you may get cancer or heart disease or something, that does not have to be the case?
That does not have to be the case. And there are people who had those genes, strongly inherited genes for cancer, heart disease, or whatever it might be, and don't get the disease. Now, you ask yourself why. In the book, I tell the story of Isabella and Olivia Murphy. They are identical twins, and their story was told in the Daily Mail paper in the UK. And so again, identical twins born with exactly the same genes, identical genes. But at 2 years old, Isabella got childhood leukemia and Olivia did not. Why? What on earth could be triggering cancer in the one child and not in the other when their genes are identical? There are lots of examples like this of kids who one kid gets cancer, one kid doesn't. One kid has a heart issue, the other one doesn't. And so what the doctors found when they looked at these two girls lived in the same household, had identical lives. This just baffled their doctors. And eventually they traced Isabella's cancer to the stress of a tonsillectomy when she was 6 months old. The stress of that appears to have triggered the onset of that childhood leukemia. Stress is the killer. It's not having the gene that's the killer, it's the stress that turns the gene on that's the crucial thing. That's why what all of these good practices have in common, meditation, EFT, neurofeedback, heart math, what they have in common is they lower your stress level. They are dialing down those genes that are are responsible for stress, and then they're dieting down your levels of cortisol and adrenaline.
It's fascinating. My wife Jessica and I, we were talking about diet yesterday because that's coming up on the show a lot recently. And I did something kind of radical for myself this past fall when we had on Dr. Terry Wall. She has the Walls Protocol. And what it was is, and this is going to be sacrilege for some people out there, I started incorporating some non-organic fruits and vegetables into my diet to get more diversity because I couldn't find, I know. Well, no, seriously, there was stress around not eating organic. And I'm betting now the stress over making my diet too restrictive to protect myself was much more than counterbalancing. And I know there are people who are not going to be happy with me saying it, but for myself, the good stress, the positive thing of getting more colors of the rainbow into my diet outweighed the bad stress about worrying, well, I've got to only get these particular fruits because that's all they've got here right now that are organic.
Yeah, and to take that further, there's an exception to that. There are people who are really sick and who need to have a super pure diet. But for the most of human beings, the majority of people, a little bit of challenge in your diet is fine. If you have something that introduces bacteria and your system has to fight off that bacterium, that actually makes your immune system stronger, not weaker. If you have an environmental chemical that's a bit of a challenge for you, but don't go expose yourself to it. But if you have a little bit of it to deal with, that just makes your body a little bit stronger. We human beings are so adaptive. We have lived through ice ages. We've lived through extremes of heat and cold. We've lived through plagues. We've lived through all kinds of really bad stuff that was out to get us as a species over the last, several million years. And so all of those things are healthy challenges to our immune system. I'm so struck sometimes by parents who are so overprotective of their kids and don't want their kids exposed to any kind of, the kids are playing in the dirt and they go, oh no, Johnny's playing in the dirt.
Oh, dirt is good for you.
Johnny playing in the dirt is exposing Johnny to all kinds of organisms that are challenging his immune system and building up immunity so that when bad stuff comes along, he has a well-developed immune system. I watch some parents, their kid has a sniffle, they take the kid to the doctor and get a course of antibiotics. Now, of course, antibiotics are ineffective against viruses which are causing those sniffles, and those antibiotics are destroying all the gut flora, all the microbiome of that kid. So the parents think they're doing a good thing by being overprotective, and in fact, they can be really setting up their kid for all kinds of health challenges later on. So you're absolutely right, Michael, that the challenging your system with a few of those things that aren't absolutely pure, absolutely organic, actually can be strengthening you rather than weakening you.
Woohoo! So let's go from there and let's talk about a few studies before we go into some of the positive things that we can do. There is a mice study from the early 90s for, I believe I'm going to pronounce this completely wrong, the agouti gene, if I get that right, or a gouty gene. And I was fascinated because I think this has some real bearing, all of these studies do, but this has some real bearing for parents and people having kids in the future, which is how you could flip this gene so simply in the mama rat.
Yes, and the agouti rats with the agouti gene expressed, they have yellow coats, they eat voraciously, they get very overweight, they tend to have diabetes, and they die a lot sooner than normal rats. So the agouti gene is kind of a ticket to heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and death, early death. Really bad effects. What Randy Journal is a wonderful friend of mine. He was working at Duke University at the time with one of his graduate students. He performed the study, and they fed the mice of these. And
just to back up for a second, if the agouti mom has it, the baby going to be agouti too. At least
absolutely.
That was the assumption, the medical
that was the assumption.
Okay.
Yeah, and then they fed the moms these foods that were rich in a kind of chemical, a kind of chemical chain that suppressed certain genes, including the agouti gene. So these babies were born with the agouti gene that should have made them big and fat and die early, and they weren't. Their coats were brown, they didn't overeat, they stayed slender, they had almost twice the lifespan of regular agouti mice with that gene silenced or turned off. That was an absolutely stunning discovery because it showed us the power of just down-regulating one gene epigenetically. They still had that bad gene that was out to get them, and it was turned off by their diet. We can do the same thing, not just with our diet, but with our minds, with our emotions, with our spiritual practices. If we dial down those stress genes, we're having a positive effect on our health and our longevity.
That's fascinating. There's another study, lots of fun studies in here on rats. And this one was rat mothers who spent a lot of time licking and grooming their pups and how the pups did later on in life.
Yeah, and again, what happened with those pups is that they had the same genes in their brains, the same fight or flight genes as others, but the pups that got licked and groomed, that got attended to, that got loved, the licking and grooming, that's the rat equivalent of, oh, I love you, I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to nurture you.
Well, that's
Nurtured
touch, and
pups.
so many of us today are no fault to the moms, but we're put in nursery school or daycare, and we start to get, we may lack that mama or papa touch.
Many people, in fact, most people in our cultures have a touch deficit. And in my live workshops, and I have a workshop called Whole Energy Lifestyle, or WELL, W-E-L. In that live workshop, I have several exercises designed to redress that touch deficit. People are just craving touch, and that craving actually is a reaction to not having been touched, not having been nurtured enough when they were children. So what we do in the WELL workshops is we have several exercises designed to give people a very safe environment in which they can repair some of those touch deficits. So touch is vital. In those studies with those rats, they found that the baby rats that got the touch, that got licked and groomed, cared for by the mother rat, they still had the same startle response and stress response as normal rats, but the genes that dial down the stress response were expressed, were turned on. So when they were startled, again, they went to a 10 out of 10, but they dropped right back down immediately. They had learned to handle the stress response. There are stress genes in our brains, and then there are stress dampening genes in our brains. So you hear that big loud noise outside, sounds like a gunshot. You realize, oh, it's just the UPS delivery truck backfiring as he turns the truck around. So that's the stress dampening gene. What happens, for example, with schizophrenics, because that same team went on to then study schizophrenics, human schizophrenics. They looked at the brains of people who had schizophrenia and committed suicide and compared those with the brains of normal people who just died in car crashes and random events. And they found that those schizophrenics had all of those stress dampening genes in their brains, but they were shut down. It's a tragedy. They had all the genetic equipment required to dampen the stress response, but that genetic equipment was just turned off, wasn't working. So it was called, hypermethylation of those stress dampening genes in the brain. So those poor people living in fight or flight all the time until they kill themselves. That's an extreme example, but a less extreme example is you or me every day, either letting ourselves stay stressed, thinking about the bad stuff, or learning one of these techniques and dampening that stress response deliberately and consciously and cultivating inner peace.
I think some of these studies really show that extremely powerfully. Dr. Ironson did a study on AIDS patients, and this one was mind-blowing, how one belief can flip the switch on or off.
She couldn't believe it. I talked to her about the study shortly after it was published, and she's a professor of psychiatry and psychology at Miami University. And she said, Dawson, when I got my data back and ran the analysis, I thought we'd made a mistake. We reran the data because we couldn't believe it. The strongest correlation, now again, they're looking at AIDS patients, and they're looking at two things. One was the increase in AIDS viruses in their blood, and the other was the decrease in the kinds of white blood cells that are affected by the AIDS virus. What tends to happen in AIDS patients is the AIDS count goes up and the white blood cell count goes down until the person succumbs to an infection. And what they found was that in some patients, the AIDS virus count rose slowly or declined, and their white blood cells, instead of going down in number, were going up in number. And they found that the strongest correlation was with whether the patient believed in a benevolent universe or a punishing universe. If they believe that the world is an unsafe place, that I'm being punished by God, I'm being punished by other people, I'm a victim of my genes, I'm a victim of my circumstances, blah, 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 that victim mentality, those are the people where the AIDS count rose fastest and the white blood cell count dropped the quickest. But the people who believed in a benevolent, loving universe, they had the opposite effect. Their AIDS count dropped, their white blood cell count went up, and some of the people, by the end of that study, they had undetectable levels of AIDS in their bloodstream.
Woohoo! That leads me to another study on the power suggestion, maybe. Harvard study, 84 maids, whether they were told they're getting exercise or not.
Again, just a mind-bending study, one of several done by the same research team at Harvard. And what they did was the one group of maids was given a lecture, simply given a lecture saying that, did you realize that your work as a maid, bending, stooping, picking things up, cleaning rooms, that meets all the criteria for a really good exercise, healthy exercise program for an adult. And the other group did not get the same lecture. So the one group now just had the belief, I'm doing my usual stuff every day, and this meets all the criteria for healthy adult exercise. That group, again, they were all doing the same thing in their work still, but the group that had the belief now that this meets all the criteria for healthy exercise, their waistlines contracted, their physiological markers improved, their heart rate improved, all kinds of good physiological changes happened just because they had a belief. Our beliefs are that strong. Now imagine if it's not just a half-hour lecture. Imagine if every single morning, Michael, you are filling your mind with your highest aspirations. If you're tuning in to a higher power, if you're imagining a benevolent universe loving you, pouring through you, impassioning your day. Imagine doing that every single day, conditioning yourself to that. You actually literally shape the capacity of your brain to send those signals by reinforcing those signals every single day. You have magic inside you based on your beliefs, based on your spiritual practice, based on your imagination. And what I encourage people to do in the Genie in Your Genes is use it. Do these things. We know exactly what it takes to turn on positive gene expression and to turn off the expression of those cortisol and stress genes. Just jump in, do those things will have those positive effects.
So I'm going to ask you about that, and I want to ask specifically about your morning routine. You alluded to it in our last interview, so I want to go there. Before we do that, I want to talk about prayer and heart surgery, because this is another one I've heard from so many different directions and is still mind-blowing.
Yeah, and there have been something like 34 prayer studies, and most of them show that there is an effect from praying for people, long distance, even if the people don't know they're being prayed for. And the prayer, though, can't just be generic prayer. There was one huge study done where people repeated it, I think an 18-word generic prayer, showed
with no feeling, no emotion to it, just pull out the script.
Emotion.
This is my prayer to help me heal.
Right. Not show that was not effective, but passionate prayer, heartfelt prayer, personal prayer where the person you're praying for, that sort of prayer is shown to be effective. Now, the remarkable thing about when I wrote the book also, one of the funny things is that I didn't really want to write about the long distance effects because it's too woo-woo. Mm-hmm. If I'm there in the room with you and I'm doing work on you, if I'm a meditation master, if I'm a chiropractor, if I'm an energy healer, there in the room with you, that's the kind of effect I can explain because I have physical presence with you. But how do you explain long-distance healing? Qigong sent over a distance, prayer sent over a distance. That's really hard to explain. I try to write the Genie in Your Genes, but I had the first draft of the book all written, and I did not want to write about distant healing because it's inexplicable. We have no mechanism to explain how this could happen. But I realized I absolutely had to write that chapter. It was also a very difficult chapter to write because I had to write, go to quantum effects, non-local effects, and then explain these really hard concepts for people. An 11-dimensional universe, I'd explain them in terms that were easy to understand. So it was a hard chapter to write, but I had to write that chapter because there are those distant effects with EFT tapping. There are, in one paper that a colleague of mine wrote, there are 100 documented cases, rigorously documented, of people who tapped somebody a long way away. Often the person didn't even know they're being tapped for, and they shifted. I was doing this with somebody on the phone the other day. I was on a phone call with a friend of mine in England.
And you're going like this remotely on the eyes, on the meridian points.
He was describing how miserable he was feeling and how sick he was that day. So I was just tapping along on myself while I was listening to him talking. And at the end of the call, I said, "How do you feel now?" He said, "It's funny. I feel much better now."
Oh, good Lord.
So all of these things seem to work long distance. So one other cool thing in the book too is I talk about experiments showing how DNA can be changed by intention long distance. These experiments were done by friends of mine at the HeartMath Institute in Boulder Creek, and what they did was they had people enter the state called heart coherence. And we'll be doing a little exercise, a little meditation on this later on, where I'll guide you into a super quick way of getting into heart coherence yourself in just a second. And anyway, people were in heart coherence. They then had an intention that a DNA molecule would change its configuration. And, DNA is a double helix, and they can either be twisted tighter or they can be untwisted, a little bit looser. And so the people were given the intention of making these DNA coils twist tighter. And you can measure the degree of twist in DNA. And so the researchers had people intend, while in heart coherence, that the DNA was twisting tighter, and it did. And they like 3 samples. Sample 1, but then 2 samples on either side of them. And the people doing the research said to the volunteers, okay, go to heart coherence and intend that only the DNA in sample 1 is going to twist tighter, not 2 and not 3. And that's exactly what they found. Only sample 1 twisted tighter, the other 2 were unaffected. So it's amazing. They then did that same experiment with those 3 samples at a distance of 50 miles away, and were able to replicate the effect. So again, even DNA can be changed long distance.
Oh, and it shows the effect that thought has on things. Earlier we were talking about the merry maid, so to speak, and I was thinking about how it's New Year's time right now. People are going to the gym. If you go to the gym thinking this isn't going to work, then the body's not going to respond to it, even if you diligently go. If you go to the gym saying, I'm going to lose 10 or 20 pounds, I'm going to get those abs, or I'm going to get those muscles, or even my blood pressure is going to drop from going to the gym. If you intend that, you're literally, correct me if I'm wrong here, you're flipping the switches there.
There was actually a study done to test that about a year and a half ago, and they took men who were going to the gym, had a conditioning program, and what they found was that those that believed it was helping them, that had a strong belief in the positive effect of exercise, had a significantly better effect from exercise than those that regarded it as a chore. Like, going to the gym, you watch some of these guys working, and they're frowning and they're grunting and this is clearly they're forcing themselves to go, and their motto is no pain, no gain. Now those are 4 of the most counterproductive words in the English language.
Jessica and I watched yesterday a trainer training somebody. He was using, like you're saying, no pain, no gain, and he was saying, I want you to move violently. Move violently. I'm thinking,
that is totally counterproductive advice, because what then happens, okay?
Yeah.
So it's a new year, you start the exercise program, you go to the gym, you push yourself, you work out so hard, and so it's difficult, maybe you have a lot of strain on your body, so your body and your mind then associate the gym with pain.
Pain and
now,
violence.
why on earth do you want to go to a place that you associate with pain? It makes no sense whatsoever. In our live workshops, I tell people, go to the gym, work out till you feel, because of course you feel really good when you start working out because you have all these endorphins flooding your brain. Work out, get that endorphin high, get that high, feel good, And as soon as it feels bad, stop. I was at the gym this morning, right before the show, and I normally do 2 sets of 15 squats. My second set, I did 13 squats. The 13th, it began to feel like a bit of a strain. I was also using 10 pounds more than usual. I quit at 13 rather than pushing through the 15. Now, what's happening in my brain is that because I've got this endorphin rush, I'm quitting while I'm ahead. The moment it feels bad, I stop. My brain associates the gym with pleasure. I want to go to the gym. You can't hold me. You can't stop me going back from going to the gym. When I get back from a trip, for example, when I haven't been able to go to my gym for a week or two, the first place I go is the gym because my body, I've wired myself to associate the gym with pleasure. So no gain, no pain, no gain. Absolutely not. Don't do that. You need to associate exercise, healthy food, clean water, all the good things in life with pleasure, not with pain.
Do you associate it too with spirituality, that this is a spiritual experience as well?
With spirituality and with positive emotions. So whatever you can do to catalyze positive emotion, when you're at the gym, imagine like the concept in Oriental medicine called Qi. Yep. Imagine Qi pouring through your body.
Beautiful.
In my earlier book, Soul Medicine, I talk about the different kinds of Qi. And you imagine the kind of Qi that is carrying healing effects pouring through your body as you exercise. So again, you're filling your mind with positive attitudes toward exercise, positive attitudes toward the gym, positive thoughts about your body, embracing the Qi, and this being part of your spiritual practice. You know, the gym is a spiritual practice. Now, when you see it that way, and you have all this positive emotion linked to it, suddenly the whole picture becomes different. The gym hasn't changed, your workout hasn't changed, but your frame, your perspective, the frame through which you see that part of your life has changed, and that frame changes everything, including your gene expression.
I've got a crazy idea now I'm going to start tomorrow, which is, I've done, so many of us have done karate or any martial arts, and you bow, or ojigi, I guess they call it in Japanese, before you go in your dojo.
Yes.
And it's also, Jessica and I met at a Tibetan prayer center where you bow before going into the prayer hall. Well, as funny as it is, you can literally bow before you go into the gym, setting your intention that this is going to be a experience. You set the intention. So now let's talk about, I want to talk about, you've studied so much of this, then rather than maybe say we should do this or do that or do the other thing, what are you doing? And so let's look at what you do first thing in the morning, because you're rewiring, or maybe we should say you're expressing and down-regulating genes every single day you get up.
What I'm doing is when I first get up, I'm doing a little exercise called eco meditation, ECO meditation. And I developed eco meditation about 7 or 8 years ago now. And I was at several conferences talking to other scientists, and we were talking about the commonalities between neurofeedback, biofeedback, meditation, EFT, all of these things. We realized they all downregulate the stress response. But I realized that when somebody is in deep meditation, they're breathing a certain way. Their heart rhythm, their heart rate variability is a certain way. It's regular. Mm-hmm. Their muscles are relaxed. And so what I did was I said, these are all physiological things happening when somebody is in deep meditation. What if I just got a room full of people, non-meditators, perhaps failed meditators, mm-hmm. and skipped all of the spiritual instructions, skipped all of the metaphysics, and just said, do this with your shoulders, do this with your tongue, do this with your breathing, and have them just mimic the state of a meditation master. Mm-hmm. And Michael, it was absolutely astonishing. They went into deep meditation immediately. I've now been doing this with people for several years. I'll take a whole room full of people, and in about 90 seconds, they follow 7 simple steps. And all they're doing is the physiology of meditation. We're skipping all the mental beliefs about it. We're skipping all the explanations, all the training. They're just doing the physiology meditation, and they go into this really deep state. So I do it every morning myself. I first of all tap to release mm-hmm. any resistance to my highest good. Because I may
and
have
if you're not sure how to do
stressful thoughts
tapping, let me pause you for a brief second. If you're not familiar with
Yes.
tapping, we have another show that you can listen to. Catch it on InspireNationShow.com or go to Dawson's website where you can find out more about how to do tapping. Okay, go.
Yes. Yeah. So you can go to my website, dawsongift.com, learn about tapping, and also I have the instructions for eco meditation there as well. So you tap this to release any resistance. So maybe a resistance, maybe you get up, you feel some parts of your life are going well, some parts of your life aren't going well, maybe you have some worries about the day ahead. You just tap to drop all of that stuff.
So when you get up, then you're doing a scan. After you do this meditation, you're checking what emotions do I have going on in my body, what fears or concerns do I have for the day?
Before you do the meditation.
Okay, before.
So you clear yourself before. Just spend 2 minutes tapping, and that'll clear you. Then you follow these 7 steps of eco meditation, and that puts you into this really deep meditative state. You then stay there. I like to stay there for 20 minutes at least, but 40 minutes is wonderful, an hour if I have the time. But most days I need to be off and doing things, so it's 20, 30 minutes of doing that. And you feel so calm and so centered. In that state, too, I always ask myself, what do you, the universe, have in mind for me? I am a great advocate of what I call high mind. So rather than thinking at the level of your limited local mind, your conditioned thinking comes from who you are right now, open yourself to the magic. What does the universe have in store for you? What incredible, miraculous things might it have in store for you today? So you focus on high mind. You tune into high mind, the highest possible perspective of who you are and what your day might bring. When you start your day with high mind, you have a whole different perspective on everything than you do if you started at the level of local mind. So do those things in the morning. Tap, do eco meditation, tune in to the universe's highest possible vision of who you might be, and then I can tell you your whole day is shaped very differently. You've been loved and nurtured and touched by the universe, and you're going to go out there and have a very different experience from your limited human conditioned background thinking you usually have.
I love that. It really, and particularly going for high mind, it changes your perspective on everything. The things that you were worrying about before, they suddenly typically seem a lot smaller. So what are some other things that we can do to get our genes to express differently, or to get our genes to do what we want them to do, so to speak?
Doing that routine in the morning gives you a baseline to start the day. So you then start the day and everything looks good. But then stuff happens, life happens. So you get stuck in a traffic jam on the way to work and you get upset and frustrated. Or you open your first email and there's a project that's not going well you have to deal with. So what do you do about that? You have to deal with this disappointment. Maybe your spouse gets out of bed on the wrong side and says something snarky to you. Maybe you have a kid who's acting out, whatever it might be. Things happen throughout the day that disturb that baseline. Now you've set the baseline in place in the morning with tapping and eco meditation, but then things happen during the day that disturb your baseline. What do you do then? Well, you want to get back to baseline as quickly as possible. So say, for example, you do have that traffic jam on the way to work in the morning. Tap during the traffic jam. Release those bad feelings as soon as you possibly can. Get back to feeling good. What then happens is you establish a baseline in your levels of neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine of feeling good. And then when anything happens to disturb your baseline, a fight, an argument, a fender bender, whatever it might be, you then feel out of sorts. You feel your cortisol is too high, your adrenaline's too high, maybe your dopamine's too high. You then bring yourself back into that balanced state as soon as possible with tools. And tapping is my favorite one because it just works so fast. Usually 2 minutes of tapping and you're through whatever it was stressing you out before.
Beautiful. Let's talk about some other things then on top of that. And for people who are listening at the end, Dawson, am I correct? Afterwards, we're going to do a meditation where we're going to show people how to do this meditation you were just describing a few minutes ago?
We are.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I want to talk about maybe some internal or external things we can do to also help our genes. For instance, our environment. What can we do with our environment? Maybe sound, decoration, otherwise. Are there things we can do to get that stress gene so it doesn't express as much?
Yes, and your environment is all the sensory inputs from outside of you and also the energy inputs from outside of you. Like my wife and I have a practice we call love bathing. Each morning when we wake up, we'll spend some time after meditation love bathing. It may only be for 5 or 10 minutes. We'll just talk about our days, we'll look at each other, we'll tune into each other, and we'll have good energy, love toward each other. At the end of each day, she gets home from work, I get home from work, we spend maybe half an hour then, and we'll love bathe. We'll really connect emotionally. Very, very powerful practice to do that. We're generating positive emotional energy to nurture and sustain our bodies and the relationships. So that's an external environmental thing, but it's consciously invoking positive energy to support your sense of well-being. Also, food. Food, again, food is important. Having a variety of food, having fresh food, having food that nurtures you. When you have cravings, when you have desires for food that is not good for you, again, tapping is phenomenally effective. In one study we did, we showed that when people tap to EFT in the presence of chocolate, in the presence of fatty food, in the presence of pastries, bread, pasta, all those empty carbs, that their levels of craving drop by an average of 83%. So huge drops in cravings from tapping. So making sure your food and your water is clean. Drink lots of water. Hydrate your body. And again, you don't need to be a food Nazi, or you don't need to be totally like rigid about your diet and your food. But generally, eat a healthy and varied diet, because that's again having an effect on your genes too. The energy around you, the people you choose to have in your life. It is so important to pick friends, to pick business contacts that will nurture and support you. You want to feel good about the people you work with. You want to feel good about the business contacts you have. If you have toxic people, if you have people who are energetically negative, that's going to affect you after a while. So you want to get yourself out of situations, out of friendships, out of business situations where you have to deal with a lot of negativity and stress. So that's your external energy environment, and cleaning it up can have a positive effect on you. So food, water, music, and beautiful things. I went into one man's house once long ago, and he just picked fresh flowers every few days, had them in vases throughout his house. Those fresh flowers were a statement of creating beauty all around him.
And we've been doing fun stuff here, which is we got in a new monitor for work because we're doing a lot of editing, and so that was our excuse. Needed a monitor, but we found that we don't really watch TV. But what we could do is all of a sudden have in these beautiful HD or 4K scenery. Like you could be looking at the desert or the Grand Canyon, and then we found Jessica did this. I had no idea. She got birds chirping on this thing for daytime, so she's watching birds chirping. Even the cats are looking at the screen. And then at nighttime, we shut off our white noise machine, and we've got now crickets going through the night, and it's changed the energy of our environment.
Yes, yeah. So you give yourself a beautiful soundscape that nurtures you and makes you feel good. And one of the things about feeling good is that you can't see this going on. But what's happening is that if I were measuring your cortisol, Michael, I would see your cortisol dropping. And what I would see is serotonin and dopamine. Those are inhibitory and excitatory neurotransmitters. You'd find that your excitatory neurotransmitters, your kind of go-get-it neurotransmitters, would be decreasing, and your inhibitory neurotransmitters like serotonin would be rising. So you have profound internal biochemical changes happen as you turn on those crickets and as you surround yourself with that positive soundscape. So yeah, that's all part of positive gene expression.
Can we literally rewire ourselves to the extent where a normally negative, quote-unquote, negative stress, we can tell ourselves or find a way to rewire ourselves so that becomes positive for the body?
Yes, but. Yes, you can, but. Big but.
Yes.
Our brains are, the whole mechanism of the way our brains work is wired to get stressed. That's because for our ancestors, the ability to get stressed and take evasive action was crucial to their survival. They were living in a world in which there are poisonous snakes and tigers and hostile tribes competing for resources. They had to have their stress response turn up on high pretty much all the time. So our brains evolved in the situation where we placed a premium on looking for the bad stuff. So even if you're in a really nice, calm situation, like you look through your email inbox, you ignore all the messages from your friends, and there's one angry message there or bad thing.
Isn't that silly?
I know. It's because of our evolutionary wiring. Our brains are literally wired to look for the bad stuff because if your ancestor
we get stuck on the bad stuff too. Then
get stuck on the bad stuff because if your ancestor missed the tiger in the grass, the penalty was death. Okay. Now, if your ancestor 100,000, 400,000 years ago, if they missed the beautiful sunset or the sound of the crickets chirping at night, nothing bad happens. So your brain has very little wiring designed to make you happy, make you feel good, and notice the positive stuff. And it has tons of wiring designed to make sure you don't miss a single bad thing happening. So that's the brain you have. That's the brain you were born with. Rewiring yourself, rewiring your attention is really, really, really difficult because you have these strongly conditioned responses to act that way. But you can do it if you persist, if you do this every day, if you establish that baseline every morning with eco meditation, with tapping, and then when you do get stressed during the day, you bring yourself back down again. Also, the other thing is there's a rule, the 20-second rule, and the 20-second rule is by my friend Rick Hansen, who wrote the book Hardwiring Happiness, and he talks about how you have to pay attention to something for 20 seconds or more in order to spark neurogenesis, the growth of new neural connections in your brain. So if, for example, when you do hear the crickets chirping, see the beautiful sunset, see the rose blooming, if you slow yourself down and pay attention to it for 20 seconds or more, you're starting to grow new neural connections in your brain to do with your happiness and contentment circuits. Then, after a while, you are counteracting the brain's negativity bias. You have this brain with a negativity bias that's constantly hunting for the bad stuff. But if you cultivate positivity in your life, if you cultivate paying attention to those good things, after a while, you literally reshape the content of your neural network, and you reinforce those circuits that do appreciate and savor happiness. And then after 6 months, a year, 10 years of doing this, you literally have a new brain. You've literally picked apart all the old stress circuits. They aren't used anymore. And you've reinforced and you've built up all the circuits of joy, happiness, and peace.
What do you say? This is switching gears from there real briefly, then we'll start to wrap things up. What do you say to someone who's gone to the doctor and gotten a diagnosis that's fairly dire and maybe has something with a genetic component to it?
Yeah. And you can do this. You can get gene scans now from your doctor. You can get gene scans from private companies without a prescription, and they may tell you you're at heightened risk of Alzheimer's or heart disease or breast cancer or one of a number of other things. So if you want to get into a state of fear about that, it used to be quite hard to do to get a genetic test, but now
you can scare yourself real easily.
You can terrify yourself and read out that list of things you're at risk for. And not only that, I can tell you one thing with 100% certainty, that is, you will die. I'm going to die. You, Michael, are going to die. Jessica will die. My wife, Christine, who I love so much, is going to die. All three of my kids, they will die. Everyone's going to die. We're all going to die. So, we have all these genetic risk factors, and death is inevitable. But death is not something to fear, and those genetic risk factors are not something to fear. Everyone does die. I'm about to start working on a project with people with cancer, with the kind of cancer that it's called, medical parlance is uniformly fatal. People who have this particular kind of cancer, they have a 3 to 6 month life expectancy. After 6 months, none of them are alive anymore. Really, you get that diagnosis, it's a death sentence. What do you do? So there are several things you can do. The first thing is, whatever your genetic test, whatever your diagnosis, reduce your stress. In one of the studies I describe in the Genie in Your Genes, the researchers found that on the surface of cancer cells, there are receptors for adrenaline, one of your main stress hormones. So literally, it's like lock and keys. On the surface of cancer cells, there are receptors, lock and key, for adrenaline. If your stress level is high, you are literally feeding cancer. You're feeding the cancer cells in your body. So you want to lower your stress and lower your cortisol, lower your adrenaline. Whatever your condition, whatever your disease, lowering your stress has absolutely nothing to recommend it. So that's the first thing to do.
So you go from your diagnosis and you need to walk, I guess today, to your local Netflix. You don't even need to walk anywhere and go immediately put on your favorite positive or funny movie.
Put on your favorite movie and laugh your head off. In another study I cite in Genie in Your Genes, the researchers found that a hearty laugh activates 31 positive genes in your body. So laughing, feeling good about yourself. Now, how can you feel good about yourself if you have a negative diagnosis? Well, you feel good about things you can feel good about. Maybe you don't feel good about that diagnosis, about that genetic test, but you're here, you're alive. You still have breath. You still can appreciate beauty. You have friends. You have loved ones. Tune into those things that are working. Sometimes people think I'm a Pollyanna because I say, focus on the positive stuff, ignore the negative stuff. Now, is that putting blinders on? Absolutely. Is that going into denial? It certainly looks like it. But you build up those circuits of joy, those circuits of appreciation, those circuits of gratitude. Make that what your life is about. Tune into that over and over and over again, and you gradually shape your brain. When I was a teenager, when I was 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, I was clinically depressed. I was so miserable. I was such a miserable person that hardly anyone wanted to be around me. Really, I remember once I was 16 years old. I was walking past a full-length mirror at a hotel, and I looked at the face of that teenager in the mirror, my own face, and I said, "That's the most miserable face I know." Aww. I've never seen anybody look so depressed. And I was looking at my own. It was kind of a shocker to realize just how depressed I was. But I just radiated gloom. That was just how I felt pretty much all the time. And I've shifted. I've changed. Now that's changed my whole experience of being in the body, of aging, of being physical. So what you can do is you just focus on those things that are positive, that build you up. There will be things that are difficult, that are negative, that tear you down. It's your responsibility to shift your focus over and over and over again to those things that are positive, that are good, that build you up. And after a while, you become a much stronger and more resilient person. In one study we did of veterans with PTSD, these were people with high levels of nightmares, flashbacks, intrusive thoughts. Most of them were Vietnam veterans, a few were Iraq or Afghanistan veterans. But we actually did a study of their genes. And we found that after they learned EFT and had 10 EFT sessions, their inflammation genes, their bad genes, were literally dialed down significantly. And their immunity genes were dialed up. So by focusing on the good, by releasing all those bad traumatic memories, you're literally shifting your gene expression. So whatever your diagnosis, do yourself the favor of focusing on the positive. People, say you're ignoring reality, you're being a Pollyanna. Congratulations.
So in your last interview with us, you talk about EFT and how to do it. A quick clarification for people. When you're talking about going through a cycle of this, is that literally as short as a minute or two of tap for a few seconds here to the next place, all those 7 points?
Yeah, and there are just a few points in the body. They're the end points of the acupuncture meridians. You just tap them lightly while repeating an affirmation or releasing a negative experience. So you just go through those points. You can get the free mini manual at my website, dawsongift.com. Download the manual. Try this out. Try your meditation. But yeah, it just takes about less than 2 minutes to tap through all the points.
Beautiful. So before we wrap things up, there's a question I asked last time. Interested to hear what your answer is today. what today, right now, brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
When I see people shift long-term grief, sadness, and tragedy. Last night, I was doing a live coaching call, group coaching call for a large group of people. We have this program called Tapping Deep Intimacy, where we apply 12 skills to love relationships. So for people who are single, they learn new skills. People who are in relationships, they learn skills to improve their relationships. And part of that program is that we have regular live coaching calls. Last night, I was working with somebody who, when we began the session together, she began to cry. And she cried uncontrollably for most of the next hour. She was so overwhelmed by grief. She said, this grief has just overcome me. It's like a lightning strike. It just, this flood of grief inside me is so big, I don't know where to begin. That was the beginning of the hour. By the end of the hour, she said, I feel light. I feel healed. You can't imagine what it's like to be a coach, which I am, and to work with people, and sometimes work with large groups of people, and to see them go from these lifetime grief-stricken states into feeling light and healed. So, Michael, that just motivates me. And I want to see, my goal each year is to reach at least 10 million people. I do it in a variety of ways, but I so want everyone to have the benefit of this kind of healing. I don't want people to drag these burdens with them throughout their whole lives, like those patients in the ACE study, where when they're 55, 65, 75, they're dealing with physical disease because they haven't dealt with this. One recent piece of research showed that people who are stressed, their lifespans are 9 to 15 years shorter than those people who are relatively unstressed. So stress robs you of over a decade of your life.
But you've been
so
saying,
you don't want to have
but you've
those
been
results.
saying that we don't have to. We can do something.
No.
We can still live the same lives, but live it differently.
Absolutely. So what motivates me is I want to see millions and millions of people getting access to this information using these super simple tools, feeling good. I want people to feel good in their bodies. I tell people in my live workshops, I'm going to turn you into an addict. I'm going to get you addicted to feeling great, feeling lots of serotonin flooding through your body. I'm going to get you addicted to low levels of cortisol, high levels of DHEA, your main rejuvenation hormone. I'm going to get you addicted to feeling good, you won't want to be any other way. So I want to turn you into like a morphine addict. I want you to be like addicted to this good feeling in your body every single day, and not be prepared to accept anything less. So that's really what gets me out of bed in the morning, makes me enthusiastic, makes me do what I do. I want to bring this to millions of people because all that suffering, almost all of it, is unnecessary. And people do not have to deal with all of these stories they've told themselves about why they have to suffer. Most of those stories are just untrue things we carry around that compromise our health, compromise our quality of life. We don't need them. They don't help us. It's time to let them go.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, any last words of wisdom you want to share?
Yeah, my last words would be, whatever bothers you, whatever brings you down, love yourself enough to let it go. Carrying those burdens around isn't helping you, isn't helping your health, isn't helping your longevity. Letting them go is something you can do. These tools we've discovered now are scientifically showing in research that they can deal with most cases of anxiety, depression, phobias, PTSD, and other mental health stressors. So don't drag that heavy burden around with you even one more hour or one more day, certainly not one more year or one more month. Let go of those things. Love yourself enough to drop those burdens and claim the life of being a person of passion, being a person of love, being a person of joy, being a person of power. That's who you were born to be. That's who you inherently still are. Claim that reality and live your full potential.
Woohoo!
That's it.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. And you mentioned a URL before, but one more time, where do you want to send people?
Just my name, Dawson, D-A-W-S-O-N, Dawson dawsongift.com. That's where you can get that free mini manual. You'll also get all the instructions for eco-meditation, as well as access to that relationship program, our weight loss program, and other online programs. So it's dawsongift.com.
Fantastic. And if you're driving along and still didn't catch that, come check out our inspirenationshow.com. We'll have links to that. We'll have all the information. We'll have the meditations on there as well. And we'll get you over to Dawson's site. So I can't thank you enough again for being on the show, Dawson. This is a lot of fun. And personally, Jessica and I are going to go put into practice even more of what you told us and realize how important it is on a minute-by-minute basis to choose the action that's going to express what we want with our genes. So
absolutely.
Thank you so much. For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, love yourself, have fun, get addicted to feeling good, check out the Genie in your genes, and shine bright. Woohoo!
Beautiful. Thank you.
Everyone, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!